essentially allowing a few experts to feed all of the business processes in the shipyard rather than requiring experts in every single role, every single area.
Hi, Darren. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Hi, Greg. No problem. Looking forward to it.
I know you've been with SSI for over 20 years, and you started off kind of at the ground level here. And how did that happen, and what's kept you in both the industry and SSI?
Well, it's been a long time. I feel a little bit old when I hear that question, but I like to think of myself as being a young pup still. I guess everyone does. I started out, I almost think being in the shipbuilding or marine space was kind of just intended to happen because, I never set out to do that. I was, like many of our original employees, I was a UVic, University of Victoria, co-op student in the computer science and engineering program, and started doing co-op work terms. It wasn't my first one here at SSI. I did a couple before that. And the one right before SSI was at the DND, the Department of National Defense, Esquimalt repair facility for shipbuilding, repair, refit, that sort of thing. It was in their IT department, so it wasn't anything to do with shipbuilding. But I finished that work term. Everything went well, and then I had another opportunity, and it was just random. I applied to a bunch of different jobs, and this one looked, kind of interesting, more for the technology than anything to do with shipbuilding, because I didn't know anything about shipbuilding at the time. So I applied, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I was their third choice in terms of that round of co-ops. They were looking for different technical skills than I had, but it ended up working out quite well for us all. And after that first co-op work term, about 4 months, I then did a contract on some of the things I was working on, and then became a full-time employee. I think the things that have kept me in the industry, and there's a couple, is I've always been interested in computers and technology and software, and I started developing software and playing around with it at a very early age. But I never was only interested in being inside the computer. I always wanted to see something in the real world. I was interested in woodworking and building things at the same time when I was younger. So seeing that there was an opportunity to both work in the software space, but also, have some impact on the real world. The first time I got to go and walk on board a client's vessel, or walk through the shipyard and see real pieces of steel that looked exactly the same as the virtual models that I'd been seeing and working on, was probably the highlight of my career at the time, and it's probably what kept me in the industry and with SSI for a long time. That sort of thing, I think today is more commonplace. I've been in any number of shipyards. I've been on board any number of vessels. But now it's more the scale of the problems that, and then the challenge that the industry presents, and the opportunity for improvements and advancements that probably is the most interesting and keeps me going.
So now in your current role as co-CEO, what do you think gives you kind of a unique perspective that someone else might not have in the industry?
Well, the industry is pretty broad. There's a lot of different pieces of a lot of different aspects to shipbuilding. There's a lot of technology coming up in shipbuilding, but there's still a lot of being boots on the ground, getting your hands dirty. But there's also a lot of business aspects. So I think the fact that myself and my co-CEO, we have we run our own business, but we're still hands-on day to day with the customers. So we have a unique perspective of understanding the shipbuilding industry, having been involved in it for 20 years, understanding the technology that we're implementing and new technologies that come out, but also understanding that those are not of intrinsic value. There's no intrinsic value to technology. It's about the business challenges you're trying to solve and the impacts they're going to have on your business. And having our own business gives us some what we think is unique insight into that.
What are some of those business challenges?
Well, shipbuilding, I think, is it's a unique industry in that you can't be looking at, even in our own business, we can look at return on investment horizons that are 2 or 3 years in terms of things we do and things we invest. And in shipbuilding, that just doesn't happen. You're looking at how is that going to impact my next milestone, whether it be laying the keel or finishing the first block. When you're going to get paid, how are you going to get paid? How is it going to delay that? So understanding how the things we do impact those sorts of aspects of the industry, I think are fairly unique to that industry. And it allows us to engage with people at those shipyards, not just as technology providers, but as technology providers who understand the business, and then that's what's driving their decisions at the end of the day.
And now, kind of turning back to the past 20 years and being in the shipbuilding technology space, what's been the biggest change in your opinion? You've seen the move towards more 3D adoption, more information management, but what do you think's been the biggest differentiator?
I think there's been a number of things that have been going on in the industry. And even though sometimes looking at the industry, you think, well, this technology adoption's been a little bit slower than maybe you'd like it to be, or maybe you see it in other places. The fact that we've had so many of the subject matter experts in the industry retiring and moving on to other things, and yet we haven't really seen, there's an impact of that, obviously. We haven't seen a significant downturn in the capabilities of shipyards and so on, because they are learning to leverage information that they have and capture that expert knowledge and feed it into software and technology to allow the business to keep going. Essentially allowing a few experts to feed all of the business processes in the shipyard, rather than requiring experts in every single role, every single area. So I'd like to say something really fancy like augmented reality or something that sounds really cool, but honestly, I think it's just the flow of information and availability of information, and making the information that is captured from those knowledgeable people before they leave the industry, bringing it back and allowing the shipyard, the organization, to actually keep that, use that valuable information has probably been one of the biggest advancements. And it doesn't look that significant on the surface. It's happened slowly over time, but I think it's what has allowed shipbuilding to stay at the level that it's been at.
Something you said kind of reminded me that a lot of people would say that shipbuilding is old-fashioned or lags behind. Do you think that's true, or?
I don't think it's as true as some people think it. As true as some people may say it is or think it is. And I actually don't think that it's so much that they're old-fashioned or that they lag behind, in that there are just business drivers that require different approaches to change and innovation. So they don't jump on the latest, greatest thing simply because it might work. There needs to be a certain level of certainty, and risk is not acceptable in almost any form, especially with defense shipbuilders and the larger shipbuilders out there. So I don't know that the old-fashioned reputation is something that's fair. I think just the risk-averse nature of the industry and the way things work makes it look that way sometimes.
What risks are shipbuilders worried about, and kind of what's the most pressing risk for a shipbuilder today? What are they worried about in 5 years?
I think, there's probably any number, but I don't know that the horizons are necessarily that long in terms of these risks. They're looking at risks to the next milestone that they need to meet on this project, and getting this project complete so they can get the next one underway, or they're building 3 or 4 at the same time, not impacting those projects. So something we might not even look at as a risk. We may say it's acceptable to see a slight decrease in productivity by trying to implement new things. We wouldn't label that as a risk necessarily. We'd see it as a cost of doing business, or a cost of continuous improvement, or But I think in the shipbuilding space, that's definitely a risk. You see a delay on the next milestone and delivery of that vessel, or just delivering or completing that block. You might not get paid for on time, and you're trying to purchase material for other projects you have ongoing and so on. So these things that, like I said, may not be called risk in other industries are significant risks for the shipbuilding industry.
I know that one of the risks you've talked about at length before is the risk of change and managing that change within a shipyard. And why is this such a challenge, and why does it seem like it's a bigger challenge in shipbuilding than in other industries?
And I think that goes back to the unique nature of the industry. And these, unlike when you're trying to build a computer keyboard like the one in front of me, or a monitor, or a cell phone, or a watch, it takes, I don't know how many of these things they pump off the line every day. But shipbuilding, you're dealing with build cycles that can be 6, 12, 18, 24 months, in case of aircraft carriers, 10 years. And you're not just building one of them. So you have a long time, long scale of time and construction period, that any change that happens throughout that time is going to impact different parts of the vessel in different ways. You've built some of it already, and now the availability of a certain piece of equipment changes. That equipment's been used in some places. It's been designed and put in place in the models for others, and in some places, it's not even a consideration. And that would be a good thing if it was only that simple. But you're probably building 2 or 3 more of those vessels that are all in different states of construction. You're trying to feed change from people who are making decisions as they go on the shop floor. You can't stop. They'd like to, and that's best practice sometimes, but they'd like to stop and say, okay, this drawing isn't clear, or I can't quite figure out what I need, or I don't have availability for that. Let me stop everything in the shipyard and go back and have engineering make that change and feed it through. But quite often, that's just not acceptable. So then you have to make visibility of that change flow back into engineering, so that the other 3 vessels or 15 you're going to build forward incorporate that change. So you're not making that same, error over and over again. So I think just the unique realities of shipbuilding make change far more impactful and far more painful than they would in a space where you've designed a keyboard once and you're building 1 million of them. It's just not the same.
You said make the change information flow. What does that actually look like? It sounds kind of like a ethereal, nice to have. The information will flow, but what does that look like on the ground?
So in the ideal world, in the ideal scenario, they would discover that a change needed to be made. Maybe they couldn't get particular material, or even they needed to change the schedule for construction because one of the cutting machines was down for a while. That, in an ideal world, that flow would be reported back into the system as an engineering change request. And usually a team of people with expertise would determine the impact of that change. How are we going to remedy that change? What's the solution? And if the change request is actually going to require engineering, then it becomes an engineering change request or an engineering change order. There's lots of different, there's no industry that has more acronyms than shipbuilding, especially when you get into defense shipbuilding combined with software, combined with just the nature of shipbuilding. Acronyms are alphabet soup. So, but anyway, when you get that engineering change order fed into the system, in the ideal world, you'd be able to identify based on what we'd like to call these days a digital twin of the ship. You'd identify, okay, what's going to be impacted by this change, and what's this change going to look like, and then feed that into the engineering team, such that they can make that change in a very clear, concise, correct way, not just to that vessel, ideally to whatever other vessels they've spun off, other digital twins, other engineering models of, and that's called hull applicability. Which hulls does this change apply to? It obviously doesn't apply to the changes to the hulls that have already been built, but the ones going forward, they may be in partial construction, so it might apply to some of those, it might not. And so figuring out how to make that change based on the information available, making that change and then feeding it back through, ideally their PLM platform or other enterprise systems into their purchasing, manufacturing, workshop orders, and back to the people on the shop floor. And ideally that happens as quickly as possible, with as little human intervention as possible. And that's where I think a lot of shipyards want to be heading. I think the best are heading in that direction, and looking at having that digital shipyard as more than a tagline or more than a pie in the sky sort of ideal, but we're getting close to having that be a reality and having that information flow without requiring a lot of spreadsheets and change paper and that sort of thing.
The digital shipyard is definitely one of those shipbuilding buzzwords that's kind of pervasive around the industry, and managing change well is clearly one aspect of getting there. And but what's the missing piece for most shipyards in terms of achieving that ideal digital shipyard goal?
I don't know if it's a missing piece, but it is a missing, perhaps a missing capability or just a missing mindset. You can't, if you want to implement a digital shipyard, you need to accept that you're going to have platforms from a number of different vendors. You're not going to be able to, no one sells a digital shipyard solution, no matter what they might say. You're going to have an ERP system or MRP system from one vendor, and you probably picked that system because it was the best for you at what it did. You're going to have engineering tools that allow you to design and build the types of vessels and the types of project that you have. You're going to have PLM platforms and software like that allows you to capture information from a bunch of different platforms and ensure that it comes together in a holistic digital twin sort of view of the ship, and then flow on through that into the ERP and MRP systems that you have. So the reality is you're going to have all these different pieces, and the mindset change or the capability that needs to exist is to allow that information to flow seamlessly between all these different systems. And we say flow, but I think it's more it's less vague than that, or it's more of a controlled process. That's an intelligent flow. Flow sounds like information is simply moving from one thing to the other with nothing happening in between. And these systems don't require exact same views on that information for each thing. They do their own job, so they need to know different things. They need to look at that information in different ways. So that information becomes transformed as it moves from platform to platform. And it needs to do that in a way that still makes it understandable to the next platform or the one before as change happens and so on. So that mindset and that understanding that you're going to have all these different platforms, you're going to have to deal with that complexity. And there are ways out there to be able to achieve that goal. And it's not, I think people sometimes in the past anyway have looked at that and said, yeah, that's probably the only way I'm going to be able to do this, but it's impossible. I just can't. That's a pie in the sky. You want to tell me you can have this platform that connects to all of these other things? That's going to take me forever. And these PLM implementations I've tried to do, they took me, we were 4 years into it before we saw any real results. And so I think people give up before they start these days almost, or assume they're going to fail as they begin. And I don't think that, it's not that they think, because we've successfully done this with customers these days. We know it's possible. So changing that mindset to it's impossible, so I'm not going to try, to it's possible, it's achievable, and we can do this, I think is that what needs to change. Is
it happening? Are you seeing it around the industry?
We're seeing it with those customers that we've partnered with, such that they see the potential. They bite off not the whole project, not the whole thing, but they bite off one incremental piece of that. We work with them to implement that integration at a certain level on a certain piece of the processes they have between their ERP system and our PLM platforms. And once they see that and they see, okay, that wasn't painful. I was actually able to see value. I have something working. Then I think they start to accept that it's, that this isn't going to be something that's going to end up 4 years later and not see much return on that. They think, okay, what can we do next? What's the next piece we can bite off and see value? And we are seeing more and more of the shipyards we work with adopting that sort of approach to it and seeing value. And sometimes even faster, we're surprised with how quickly we can achieve those sort of results. And they certainly are. And then when they put their heads up and look around and go, wow, we're actually, getting somewhere on this. So.
Just to finish off today, I wanted to kind of ask a fun question. If you could get shipbuilding executives to agree on one thing, what would that be?
Wow. Well, I don't know if this would take agreement, but it would be interesting to see, every shipyard, I think, looks at what they do and doesn't realize, they don't think, they're like, oh yeah, that might work for them, but we're different. We do things differently here. And of course, every shipyard, every company does do things differently to a degree, but the challenges, the pain, the things that they're trying to resolve are a lot more similar than they might think. So just understanding that, and I guess if you want, agreeing that everyone's not as unique as they think they are, and that the challenges that they have down the street are probably pretty similar to the challenges we're having here, with our own flavor. And that I don't know how many times I've heard, yeah, but that doesn't apply to us, or yeah, but that would be more difficult for us to do here. And sure, there are differences, but I think the reality is that if it can be done successfully for one shipyard, it can probably be done successfully for most, as long as they make that mindset change that we're talking about earlier.
Well, let's hope we see agreement on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Greg.